GamingBolt presents 15 worst games of 2018 so far. No year can be a perfect year. That's true in all walks of life, but let's go ahead and stick with just video games for now. Every year we get great games, and every year we get horrible ones. 2018 has been no different. Yes, we've played a lot of excellent games over the course of the first 6 months. But by that same token, we've also had the displeasure of playing some truly atrocious ones. In this feature, we're going to be talking about what have been, according to us, the 15 worst games of the year so far, starting with number 15 and counting right down to what is, in our estimation, the worst game of the first half of 2018. Dissidia Final Fantasy NT. The Dissidia subseries of Final Fantasy may not stand among the likes of Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter as the best of the best in the fighting genre, but no one can deny that they've been pretty great games. Up until now. Dissidia Final Fantasy NT was a profound disappointment, surprisingly lacking in content and customization with the glaring absence of even the simplest of modes, and failing to do even the bare minimum that you'd expect from a fighting game. With its simplistic mechanics, its total lack of variety in gameplay, and its overall tone of lackluster quality, Dissidia Final Fantasy NT stands as one of the most disappointing and one of the worst of this year. Destiny 2 Warmind. Where did it go so wrong for Destiny? Bungie's ambitious new franchise started out well enough, bearing the brunt of some valid criticisms, but still providing an enjoyable experience that only got progressively better with its subsequent expansions. Destiny 2 arrived, and the improvements that we expected to see were nowhere to be found. The hope then was that the sequel's expansions would succeed where the base game failed, but we could not have been more wrong. Warmind, Destiny 2's second major expansion pack, is an absolute mess, just as much as Curse of Osiris was. Reused content, lackluster storytelling and writing, and a surprisingly short campaign only served to make its high price tag seem even more unreasonable. The Inpatient. Acting as a prequel to Until Dawn, The Inpatient looked like an exciting prospect, one that could utilize the unique capabilities of VR better than most games. In truth, the game was not at all as good as we were hoping it would be. It wasn't fundamentally broken, and certainly props have to be given to the game for maintaining a strong sense of atmosphere, but everything else about it just fell flat. The game is bogged down by a lack of variety in gameplay and overly short runtime, and just a general feeling of boredom. Certainly not the most offensive game you will play, but definitely one of the most forgettable. Titan Quest. Titan Quest is a game that illustrates just how much our industry, its tastes, and its sensibilities have changed over the years. When this RPG first launched back in 2006, it was, by all means, a very enjoyable experience. It wasn't one that stood out among the crowd, but it was certainly a game that you get several hours of enjoyment out of. Remastered in 2018 for modern consoles, and the game just crumbled under the weight of all of the time that's passed since its original release. Plagued by technical issues, more a product of poor remastering than anything else, and just a general sense of not having aged very well, Titan Quest on the PS4 and Xbox One is a lackluster experience all around. Crisis on the Planet of the Apes VR. We're at a point in time, finally, where the Planet of the Apes franchise has risen from the ashes of prolonged mediocrity and reclaimed its rightful place among the leaders of the film industry. As we know just all too well, though, that rarely has any impact whatsoever on how a video game of the same name might fare, because VR shooter Crisis on the Planet of the Apes is about as unremarkable as the rebooted film trilogy was spectacular. To be fair, there's some fleeting fun to be had in some of its shooting and climbing mechanics, but on the whole, it gets over too quickly, and the majority of what you're left with is poorly executed and unenjoyable gunk. Monster Energy Supercross. Monster Energy Supercross is a very confused game. It doesn't know if it wants to be a hardcore simulator or a more easygoing arcade racer. Certainly there are times when you might have fun with it, but that fun is far from everlasting because once the immediate impact of its first impression wears off, the cracks in the surface become much more apparent. Beneath the shallow layer of initial enjoyment is a vast abyss of glaring omissions and poor production qualities. Lacking in modes and unwilling or unable to provide respectable production qualities, Monster Energy Supercross is middling at best and utterly forgettable at worst. Out of Ammo. Without a shadow of a doubt, Out of Ammo gets points for having some great ideas and some interesting new concepts, but that counts for something only on paper, and for nothing at all when you actually get down to playing this game. Because in Execution, Out of Ammo is a game that leaves you with almost entirely negative reactions. Riddled with technical glitches and poor execution of seemingly interesting concepts, Out of Ammo fails to ever really get into gear, despite you being able to see perfectly well that there is something at its core that can potentially be plenty of fun. There's also the fact that this is a game that just wasn't meant for PSVR's more restricted spatial capabilities. A bad fit, all in all. Baseball Riot. To be completely fair, Baseball Riot is a game that can actually be kind of fun in short doses, especially if you play it on a handheld. While there's also some nice things to be said about its visual style, but look a little deeper and set the bar a little higher than that, and you quickly realize that those short doses of enjoyment are a paper-thin membrane on top of what is otherwise a repetitive, unoriginal game. And really, that's the game's biggest flaw. It isn't fundamentally broken, nor is it completely lacking in polish. No, none of that. The game just suffers from a void of originality and variety, making the entire experience falter under even slightly prolonged periods of gameplay. AO International Tennis. Tennis fans have really gotten the short end of the stick this generation, with next to nothing to appease their appetite on any system, other than games from previous generations. AO International Tennis is one of those games that attempted to bring about a change in that regard, but like all the rest, it stumbled and fell on its face. With clunky mechanics, unresponsive controls, bland visuals, and poor production qualities, AO International Tennis checks all of the boxes that every sports simulation game should stay far, far away from. Extinction. You hear a lot about how procedurally generated content can ruin a game, and every once in a while a title comes out and proves that notion completely right. Extinction is one of those games. That's not to say, of course, that procedurally generated content simply cannot be done right, but Extinction is one of those games that fails to do so. Its randomized aspects feel too limited, as if they're completely lacking in variation, and this is a feeling that permeates throughout almost the entire game. The game's world is unimaginative and boring. Its combat can quickly become repetitive and lose any sense of enjoyment. Its story and characters simply won't ever pique your interest, even slightly. And it's a shame because with a little more effort, thought, and time put into it, Extinction could have been, at the very least, a decent game. Bravo Team. If ever there was a movie about games that do the bare minimum, and only the bare minimum, and nothing else at all, Bravo Team would surely be on the poster. This is the sort of game that would have been perfectly acceptable had it been released as a tech demo for the PSVR. No one would have particularly cared about it, but no one would find it all that bad either. But Bravo Team is, by all accounts, an actual, proper, full-fledged release, but only in name. From its bland, outdated visuals, to its cursory, overly simplistic level design, to its unimaginative shooting and stealth mechanics, to its pitiful attempts at even trying to tell a story. Everything about Bravo Team is unbelievably unremarkable. Fear Effect Sedna. Fear Effect is a name that you probably remember with a lot of fondness from the early 2000s. The game was never a runaway hit, but it acquired a status of a cult classic that excelled at its weird brand of gameplay. Fear Effect Sedna gets points for trying to bring that back, for sure, but when the execution of that attempted comeback is as poor as it is here, are those points even really worth anything at all? There are some positives here, such as its visual style, its well-animated cutscenes, and its soundtrack, but every aspect that relates to actually playing the game is just so bad. From the horrible AI to the atrocious so-called strategy options, to the repetitive and bland stage design and unimaginative and boring puzzles, to even the terrible cover mechanics, there's just so much here that needed much more work. Hell, even the story, which seems initially interesting, is ultimately let down by poor writing and inconsistent voice work. Time Carnage. There seems to be a bit of a trend here. Time Carnage is yet another VR game that fails to properly do what it wants to accomplish. Admittedly, its arcade and challenge modes can be a fair bit of fun at times, but the game makes the bizarre decision of locking most of its content behind progress in the campaign. And that would be all well and good, really, if the campaign just wasn't so awful. Not only are there no hints of a plot beyond the most cursory stuff anywhere, making you wonder why the game even has a campaign, what you end up playing through is also completely boring and uninspired. If you're looking for something to throw your money at for the PSVR, trust us, turn around and throw it at something else because Time Carnage just doesn't deserve it. Tennis World Tour. One more tennis game that just fails to do what so many fans of the sport had hoped it would. Mechanically speaking, the game is extremely inconsistent, feeling floaty at sometimes and unresponsive at others. On the content side, the game is surprisingly lacking, with no online component or even a doubles offline mode, both of which were things that were promised for the game at launch by the developer. The visuals look like something out of an early last-gen game, while the droning commentary is just about the worst thing you will ever hear in any sports simulation. Admittedly, there is some fun to be had in the campaign mode, which offers a nice sense of progression, but given how unsatisfying and imperfect the game's core mechanics feel, even that becomes hard to enjoy very quickly. Past Cure. How does one describe just what a mess this game is? It's an amalgamation of ideas pulled from all corners of the industry. Its cover mechanics are terrible, making the shooting an absolute chore. Its puzzles are so bad they literally have no reason to exist. Even its slightly interesting narrative setup is let down by horribly written dialogue, laughably bad voice acting, and baffling leaps of logic. Past Cure is not a game that deserves your attention, not even 5 minutes of it. And that about does it for this video. If you enjoyed what you watched and want to see more from GamingBolt, you can always hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell icon next to it. That way you will never miss any of our videos.